I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for February the 27th, 2026. Over the past 3 weeks on our theology roundup, we've been going through a series approaching one law controversies. This series will be coming to an end today, and we probably will not be addressing this issue ever again if I get my way. Obviously, it'll have to be mentioned from time to time, but other than a piecemeal discussion here or there, we're not going to go into the detail we've gone into with one law, one Torah theology again. For many of you, this has been a difficult series because you've been able to see that not only am I disfavorable to one law, one Torah theology, but I'm not very favorable with the future it appears to be going on. Likewise, some of you all have been very pleased that we have discussed this matter. We've actually gone into the different passages which use one law or one statute, addressing them in some kind of ancient context, and for trajectorizing what they actually mean today in today's Messianic congregations and synagogues. In ancient Israel, native and sojourner were not nearly identical, as one law, one Torah proponents tend to conclude. However, they did have far more in common than not. Everyone within the broad community of Israel was indeed admonished to hear and obey Moses' teaching. And so, with that in mind, especially per the dynamics of the new covenant and God supernaturally transcribing his instruction onto the heart and mind, those are the things today's Messianic community needs to be facilitating. Now, one of the things I have stressed throughout this examination, a dismissal or a rejection of one law, one Torah theology, and its negative dynamics, its legalism, its bad fruit, does not mean a dismissal of non-Jewish believers coming into the Messianic community and taking on various outward things of Torah as they grow and mature in faith. Many people don't make that connection. Many people assume if you reject one law, one Torah theology, you're telling non-Jewish believers to go back to church and to stop doing things which they have become accustomed to. That's not true at all. But one law, one Torah theology is not the future. It is not the future. It's not something I want to be a part of. I really don't appreciate it when there's some people out there who try to associate me with it. I don't work with one law, one Torah people. I have had, especially over the past several years, some very poor interaction with them. And as things move ahead in the future, we're going to be getting further and further and further apart. We're going to be agreeing on less and less. The future is with the Messianic movement, with the Messianic Jewish mission of Jewish outreach, Jewish evangelism, Israel solidarity, standing against anti-Semitism and standing against anti-Zionism. It's with those who recognize the Romans 9, 10, and 11, all Israel will be saved trajectory of salvation history, and along with that, a recognition that the nations have been streaming to Zion in these end times to be taught in the truths of Moses' teaching. And we're going to be getting into that next week. But as the subtitle of today's message goes, there has to be a better way than what we have seen with one law or one Torah theology. Now, over the past 20, 25 years, one law, one Torah theology has had a lot of criticisms lodged against it. And some of those criticisms are absolutely justified and warranted. Some of those criticisms involve a failure on the part of one law, one Torah advocates to adequately troubleshoot their beliefs. So, for example, one of the things I have pointed out in our examination of the different passages over these past few weeks is one law or one statute was not speaking of universal Torah, the Torah or the Pentateuch as a whole. It was one law, as in lowercase l, concerned with specific legislation where the sojourner in ancient Israel could have been unfairly taken advantage of. You don't tend to see that level of troubleshooting. Well, what do you do with that kind of proposal on the part of one law or one Torah proponents? They kind of put that off to the side as though they didn't hear it. Not too dissimilarly from how young earth creationists, when they hear that the term yom in Genesis chapter 1 may not be a 24-hour day, it might be a long period of time, as old earth creationism, progressive creationism brings up. What do you do about this? And what do you do about the appearance of the universe in the billions of years? A lot of people just put that off to the side and really don't want to go into it. So, I mean, it's the same hesitancy. It's the same insecurity. One law for the native or the sojourner, yes, but that appeared in a context regarding specific legislation. And, with a lot of the one law, one Torah people, we're dealing with a lot of fundamentalist values. We're dealing with a lot of simplistic thinking, and they haven't troubleshot a lot of things. And as you have doubtlessly also seen, that lack of troubleshooting extends to, well, all right, so you're not Jewish, but you're doing things like Shabbat, the appointed times, a kosher style of diet. Okay. There are a lot of people in the Messianic Jewish movement who think that's great when non-Jews embrace these things and they consider it part of being one new man, one new humanity. Yes, they wanted to also move toward, well, how are you going to co-labor with us in the salvation of Israel? But they're not telling people to necessarily stop. But what do you do in the event that you're visiting a family member, a friend's house, more likely an acquaintance, and you might be served unclean things? Are you going to make a scene about it? Or are you going to recognize that there was no capital penalty associated with the dietary laws, and actually demonstrating hospitality, love for neighbor is more important? And as Paul directed in 1 Corinthians 10, eat what you were served, but if you find out that it's been sacrificed to idols, then you should dismiss it. That's the kind of troubleshooting one law is just completely devoid of. And this is why it is seen to promote a great deal of legalism, judgmentalism, self-righteousness, and pride. There's no flexibility. There's no exceptions sometimes. And that kind of judgmentalism is why many people who have hung out in the one law camp, one Torah camp for a while, eventually are seen to leave. I just can't handle this judgmentalism anymore. And, I'm doing these things myself, but I mean, come on, what happened to grace, love, mercy, the fruit of the Spirit? So one law has a lot of legitimate criticisms lodged against it. And today I'd like to go into some of the reasons why I, once having associated with one law people, fellowshipped with them at one time, no longer do so. Now, it is a very bad argument because while there are criticisms against one law, it's a very bad argument for critics to say that, well, one law has never been seen throughout religious history, Jewish history, Christian history. And since it's never been seen, certainly in the past 2,000 years, it's obviously something which is wrong. That is a bad argument. That kind of argument, well, it hasn't been seen throughout religious history. That kind of argument right now is being lodged against many people in Messianic Judaism who want to affirm that God has ongoing covenants, ongoing promises to the ethnic descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, today's Jewish people. Because after all, the position of a great deal of historic Christianity has been supersessionism, replacement theology. So if you believe that the historical argument is what we have to hold on to all the time, replacement theology wins. So in Messianic Jews, from time to time say one law theology hasn't been seen ever in Jewish or Christian history. It's a bad argument because that gets turned against the Messianic Jewish movement all the time in terms of supersessionism. The answer has to be, as we have demonstrated in our series, go back to where the specific passages are which use one law or one statute and place them in context. And while one law proponents frequently misinterpret them, they do nevertheless stress commonality between native and sojourner and ancient Israel. And there are Messianic Jewish people who are afraid of more commonality rather than difference. Simply because I am critical to a lot of the bad fruit and self-righteousness of one law theology, I'm also very critical toward this distinction theology, which has come up over the past several years and been more and more popularized. And I agree that there are differences between Jewish and non-Jewish believers. I've made it perfectly clear. We are not exactly the same. But when you overemphasize differences and distinctions, don't expect the Messianic community to grow with the type of demographics you want to attract. Because the Messianic community complains all the time, we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough this, we don't have enough that. Well, one of the things that hasn't been too easily able to attract are mainline Protestants. Mainline Protestants, who love Israel, they love the Jewish people, they're not going to be attracted to your Messianic congregation or fellowship if all you do is emphasize differences. They're not. They're going to say, okay, I agree we're not all the same, but why would I want to fellowship with a congregation that overemphasizes differences all the time? I wouldn't. So criticism of one Torah theology, which assumes that native and sojourner, Jewish and non-Jewish believers are practically the same, doesn't automatically mean embracing distinction theology either. There are some differences, but we have to emphasize common faith. And a lot of the people you find throughout this whole spectrum, they're not able to think in terms of third, fourth, fifth possibilities. They tend to be simple thinkers. And that is why we're in kind of the doldrums we're in today. Simple thinkers are not going to get us into the future, at least not the way some people think. Now, as I've said throughout this study, one law, one Torah theology has had a lot of bad fruit. Indeed, I would have to say, in my experience, the number one criticism a lot of Messianic Jewish leaders have against it is not necessarily, okay, so some non-Jewish believers doing Shabbat in the appointed times, and they're partaking of their faith heritage and Israel scriptures and being blessed by it. The more common criticism is that one law, one Torah theology promotes a lot of Torah-olatry. The God of some of these people who strongly identify as one law, one Torah, who is their God? Is their God Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God of the Hebrew Scriptures? Is it the God of the Exodus? Is it the Father of Yeshua the Messiah? Do they even believe Yeshua the Messiah is God? Many of them do. But sociologically, when it comes right down to it, the God of your average one law, one Torah proponent is in fact the Torah itself, the Pentateuch itself. And there's a lot of Torah-olatry. And I'm the first person to say you need a Torah foundation in your theology, but it doesn't end there. It builds progressively with the prophets, the writings, and the apostolic writings. But there's a lot of just Torah-olatry, worship of the Torah, and when it comes to studying the Torah, not a huge amount of deep thinking in terms of what did this mean for the ancient Israelites in the ancient Near East. And the problems everyone has is, well, you're not keeping Torah, you're not doing Torah. And certainly a lot of spiritual problems do go back to disobedience, but it clouds one's judgment so much that far too many people become quasi-Sadducees and they don't accept the ongoing revelation of God's word the way they should. And indeed, look, God's Torah is important. I believe in its ongoing validity and relevance. You don't believe me? Go look at our ministry book, The New Testament Validates Torah. We have upheld the ongoing validity and relevance of the law of Moses from the very start of our ministry. But Torah-olatry is a very real thing. And how many people, I mean, this is actually pretty easy. How many people in the one law, one Torah movement, certainly in Hebrew roots, while rightfully stressing the need to study God's word, study the Torah, have a Torah foundation in one's theology, would dismiss the concept that the definitive interpretation and application of Moses' teaching rests with Yeshua the Messiah? How many would place Moses, as much as evangelicalism has improperly dismissed Moses, but how many would place Moses at a higher level than Yeshua? I'm sorry, when Yeshua said in Matthew 5 that he came to fulfill and not abolish the law, that meant that Yeshua's ministry, example, and teachings compose the definitive interpretation of Moses' teaching. Okay? I believe we have to have a right understanding of Moses' teaching in order to understand Yeshua's teaching. But his teaching is final. And Torah-olatry manifests itself when Moses is final, not Yeshua. A number of years ago, this would have been, well, almost 20 years ago, 2005 to 2009. I'd like to tell you a little bit about some of the experience I had directly with people in the one law, one Torah sub-movement. And this is my experience. Your experience might be completely different. But experience can be a harsh teacher sometimes. 2005 to 2009, I was also working on my master's degree in biblical studies at Asbury Theological Seminary. But I was invited by Tim Hegg to be a part of a Torah resource discussion forum, right, online. And there were 4 moderators who he had, wanting to just keep tabs on what was going on. And look, at the time, I have to be honest, Tim Hegg was very appreciative that I was going to seminary. Yes, it was Arminian, he was Calvinist, but nevertheless, he knew that I was going to get a good education. Now, among the 4 moderators who he had, excuse me, one of them, over the course of the 4 years or so I was active on this discussion list, one of them committed apostasy against Yeshua, okay? Denied him as Messiah. Another one ended up, who was Christian, pastor, he ended up leaving and going to get involved with Doug Wilson in Moscow, Idaho. All right. A third one, who was a Lutheran minister, he ended up coming out of the closet later as a gay man. And then the fourth one was, of course, me. And to this day, I am still in the Messianic movement. But having been in my mid-20s at the time and now in my mid-40s, it's obvious I didn't stick in the sphere of influence of one law, one Torah. And rather than, leaving the whole one law Messianic community based on some of the bad behavior and bad fruit I saw, bad attitudes, never really got challenged. It was in the 2010, 2011, where we, in originally addressing some of these one law, one Torah passages, seeing that one law theology hadn't done the homework it claimed to do, this is when we really began to hone in on the supernatural compulsion element. I don't want to get into a lot of the religious politics behind the First Fruits of Zion shift in 2009, radically abandoning one law and then now, being a strong proponent of distinction theology. This is about me and my experiences with one law. But as a result of some changes which took place around the 2009, 2010, 2011, this is when we began to really say, look, we've seen some bad fruit with one law, one Torah, people abandoning the faith. That's not good. Have we misdiagnosed what some of the passages involving one law or one Torah actually say? And really, as I was, graduating from seminary, as my seminary experience got me to reconnect to my Wesleyan holiness roots, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way than what we commonly got to see regarding one law, one Torah theology. How many non-Jewish people came into a one law, one Torah theology, and as a result of it, they were mandated, or they felt this heavy burden, this heavy yoke placed upon them. They were mandated to do things of Torah because, well, we're all covenant members and we abide by the regulations, we abide by the requirements of the covenant. Okay. But what about the work of the Holy Spirit? What about growing in God's grace, growing in God's holiness, becoming more like Yeshua? The answer was, we're part of God's covenant. Ephesians talks about how the non-Jews are no longer strangers to the covenants of promise, which I do agree with. Fellow citizens with the saints, which I do agree with. But the spiritual dynamic was, you're a covenant member, you abide by the requirements of the covenant. No real emphasis on to use the Wesleyan terminology, the sanctifying grace of God, which changes hearts and minds, writes his instruction onto the heart and mind, and you grow to be more and more like him, more and more like Yeshua. And yes, of course, it's going to involve outward areas of obedience, but it's also going to involve a transformation of your character. We didn't really hear a lot about, as one abided by the responsibilities of the covenant, didn't really hear a lot about in one law theology, one's heart condition ever being challenged. Because when one's heart condition is never challenged, okay, you're embracing different outward things, but are you also growing inwardly in your ethics, your morality, your character, how you treat other people? That's almost completely devoid, even today, of a lot of one law discussion. Because when your heart condition isn't challenged, your attitudes aren't challenged. And worse yet, you adhere to a Calvinistic theology. Well, you're either elect or you're not. So why would we really challenge one heart's attitude, right? When you don't see one's heart condition ever challenged, it's very easy. It's very, very easy when you are looking to outward doings to be quote unquote righteous, to harbor bad attitudes and a judgmental spirit. When you're in an environment where what you eat is more important than how you look at other people and the value God places on other people as men, women created in his image, that's bad. When you are more concerned about what you do on Shabbat or not do on Shabbat outwardly, and yet, the world is full of a lot of gross, immoral evils, and you're not even concerned about that. I mean, these are the kinds of things which litter the one law, one Torah submovement. Absolutely litter it. And as you harbor bad attitudes, judgmental spirit, what happens? Well, and of course, one law, one Torah theology doesn't discuss things like spiritual warfare, demonic influences. You open yourself up to demonic influences. And I can tell you, having been involved in that Torah resource list, 2005 to 2009, I saw so many people who, they'd come in and, we try to help them, we try to calm them down, but very quickly they develop judgmental spirits, self-righteousness, unspeakable pride. And in a course of several years, you'd see people They'd get into Torah study and they'd ask questions about this verse or that verse. Okay. But very quickly, you'd see people, they'd question the veracity of the Pauline letters. Well, I don't understand Paul. I don't understand this. I don't understand that. Question the veracity of the New Testament, especially because it's in Greek. And very quickly end up denying Yeshua as God, and then perhaps even denying him as Messiah. Now, I'm not here to say those things don't happen in the Messianic Jewish sphere of influence. They can. But in my time in Messianic Judaism, one's heart attitude, one's character traits are matters of discussion. They are matters of one's progression as you walk the path of faith. You don't hear a lot about that in one law, one Torah settings. Look at some of the one law, one Torah podcasters today. How much of them really talk about character transformation? You're a covenant member, you abide by the regulations of the covenant. No emphasis on the work of the Holy Spirit, no emphasis on growing in grace, holiness, love, mercy, forbearance, and the fruit of the Spirit. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I detected 2005 to 2009. And so quickly you find out that this kind of spiritual environment, it's very toxic. You can't abide as a born again man or woman in a spiritual environment that overemphasizes keeping outward commandments, doesn't focus enough on internal holiness. And you also see apostasy not really being prevented because you're either the elect or you're not, and coming from a Wesleyan Arminian tradition, my view is, okay, a lot of people who commit apostasy, they never knew the Lord to begin with, but we can't take that risk. We have to be able to challenge people's spirituality, to make sure they're growing in grace and holiness, to make sure that they've had that supernatural moment of transformation when they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they cried out to God for salvation in his son Yeshua, and to them the most important thing is his death, burial, and resurrection. Those dynamics are devoid of a lot of the one law, one Torah sub-movement's spirituality. For example, this is where Torah-olatry, really, manifests itself. I would have discussions with people, and in 2 Corinthians, for example, you see a reference to Paul talking about another Yeshua or another Jesus. And of course, immediately they just assume that the other Yeshua, other Jesus is, well, he doesn't keep Torah, right? He doesn't keep the law. And I would agree that theologically, the Yeshua who is not a Jewish rabbi, who's not the Messiah of Israel, and who does not uphold Moses' teaching, can be classified as another Yeshua. But in context of 2 Corinthians, the other Yeshua, the other Jesus, is the one who is self-aggrandizing. The true Yeshua, the true Jesus, is one who was the sacrificial servant, the one who serves other people, the one who doesn't follow the ways and the value system of the world at large or the religious system at large. You don't hear about that in the one law, one Torah groups. Absolutely not. You don't hear about how do we follow Yeshua, his sacrificial example, his subversive example to the religious authorities, how Paul, as a disciple of Yeshua, likewise, gave of himself. He didn't claim certain entitlements he could have claimed. He sacrificed things so that we might have his legacy present with us today. These are not things you hear talked about at all in a great deal of those who identify as one law, one Torah. And yeah, as I said, it's a toxic spiritual environment. And I knew the turn of the last decade, by 2010, what are we going to do about this? There's got to be a better way than stress one law, one statute, which of course they've taken out of context. And then from there, be in an environment where it's all about outward doings and judgmentalism, legalism, a condemnatory attitude do not get challenged. And when you do not challenge people's heart attitude, that's when you can open yourself up to demonic influences. And all of a sudden, people are questioning, is Yeshua God? Can I trust the New Testament? Is Yeshua even the Messiah? Not to say those things don't happen in Messianic Judaism. They do. But if you don't challenge heart attitude, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? So what was the better way? The supernatural compulsion way, which our ministry has consistently held to, and we've had to make adjustments over the years. Everyone has had to make adjustments over the years to their theology. The better way was rather than seeing people who, are convicted that God's Torah is important, and then all of a sudden they get this heavy yoke of one law legalism forced upon them. Instead, we had to emphasize, as people grow in holiness, as they grow in sanctification, as they read the word, God will supernaturally orchestrate circumstances in their life where all of a sudden they're going to be prompted regarding different messianic things. What does it mean that he came to fulfill and not abolish the law? Do I need to be considering the importance of a Sabbath rest? And along with that, what is my relationship as a non-Jewish believer to the people of Israel, to the Jewish people? These are all elements we've had to sort through along the way. But rather than being forced upon people, mandated, obligated upon anyone, and then several years later, people who've taken on different outward elements of Torah are abandoning faith in Yeshua. Thank you, one law sub-movement. Thank you so much. Not really. Instead, we need to see people who, as they grow in faith, as they grow in holiness, as they submit themselves to the Lord, as the new covenant begins to be more conscientious in their lives, it does involve the writing of God's laws onto the heart. Yes, love for God and love for neighbor. I believe that. Growing in grace and mercy. But could it involve something like keeping the Sabbath? Could it involve something like not eating certain things? And there's the testimony of many people from evangelical backgrounds who come into the Messianic community. They get sincerely convicted by the Lord about these things. They see prophecies like Micah 4, 1-3, Isaiah 2, 2-4. The nations are streaming to Zion in the end times to be taught from Moses' teaching. That is a reality on the ground. But because it is a work of the Holy Spirit, and they know instinctively that as they do outward things, they better also be growing in their inward morality, in God's grace, and God's holiness. And it wasn't forced upon them as some kind of a legalistic burden, as one law tends to do. Instead, it was, I'm growing in this, and I see the importance of this, and I see the blessings in this. And I also know that I need to, in our very difficult times, to be standing with my Messianic Jewish brothers and sisters. And no, they may not fully understand me, and this is a developing movement. But think about it. People who are individually superintended by the Lord as they grow in holiness, as they grow in the new covenant, as they're supernaturally prompted about these matters and what they mean. And no, they might be a little more flexible than one law people, but to see them still involved in the Messianic community 5 years later, 10 years later, and to see them, absolutely committed to a Messianic lifestyle, absolutely committed to things like Shabbat, the appointed times, a kosher-style diet, but to also be absolutely committed to the Messiah event and to consider the Messiah event as the most important event in human history, and to be active in the Messianic mission, Jewish outreach, Jewish evangelism. That is what we need to see. And these are not the elements of a one law, one Torah theology, but they are important elements of the Messianic mission. That is what our ministry is committed to. You don't hear a huge stress on Jewish outreach, Jewish evangelism, standing with the Jewish people right now from a lot of one law, one Torah proponents. You just don't. You don't hear about, do you have a new heart? Are you growing in grace and holiness? What about your character? How do you treat other people? You just don't hear it. It's instead about, okay, you're a covenant member. You've got to abide by the responsibilities of the covenant. Alternatively, you are a recipient of the benefits of the new covenant, a new heart, a new mind, being filled up with God's Spirit. And as you progress in the Spirit, the Lord is going to prompt you as you read his word, as you pray, as you interact with other believers. How do I grow in grace and holiness, both inwardly as well as outwardly? And many people, as we know, as the Lord has superintended the events of their life, they might be attending some church or some Bible study, and they're like, I'm just not getting a lot out of this. I need to go try the Messianic congregation in town. Boom. And they get plugged into the Messianic movement. And it's not a matter of this yoke of legalism, this yoke of bondage, being inflexible. I mean, all the crap that you see from one law, one Torah people. Instead, it is, I'm taking these things on and I'm benefiting from them. I'm experiencing a level of God's holiness I've never experienced before. And because it's part of their growth in holiness and sanctification, the probability that they are still going to be believers 5 or 10 years down the road remains very, very high. Whereas if it's a yoke of legalism, a yoke of inflexibility, which is what you commonly see in one law, one Torah sectors, the likelihood that some of these people are still going to be believers 3-10 years from now is not as high as it should be. So I have had very poor, I would even say I've had pretty shitty relations over the years with a lot of one law, one Torah people. And, as I get older, I'm 45 now. It's just time for us to, publicly begin to separate. Yeah. And so, John McKee, he's favorable to non-Jewish believers keeping outward elements of God's Torah, provided they are a work of the Holy Spirit as people grow in faith, as they grow in holiness. But his ideology and the one law ideology, very, very different. And if you're more comfortable with the one law ideology, you need to go with them. And I don't know, as we move ahead in the future and as we begin to address issues which they are not equipped to address regarding modernity, post-modernity, issues of the day, maybe you'll get some things from us, maybe not. Others of you are going to be like, finally, somebody has said it. It took all this time, but somebody has said it. They put one law in their place, and there are alternatives out there to non-Jewish believers. In fact, Jewish believers keeping God's Torah. It's supposed to be a work of the Holy Spirit. It's supposed to be a work of sanctification. It's supposed to be one's growth in faith and holiness. So we're going to continue in the spirit of this discussion next week on our theology roundup. We're going to be getting into those prophecies regarding the Torah going forth from Zion in the end times, how significant those prophecies are, how we see them manifesting today in today's Messianic Jewish experience with both Jewish and non-Jewish believers present. So you will not want to miss that. I'm not planning to go into one law, one Torah theology again, not in this kind of detail. We'll probably have to mention it in the future in piecemeal. I encourage you to go onto our website, messianicapologetics.net, and access the article, Approaching One Law Controversies, sorting through the legalism if you need to get caught up or if you want to just be able to read something. Okay, let's move on now to our news roundup. Because right now, any of you all who've been paying attention to what's going on, while there were negotiations yesterday between the United States and Iran in Geneva, the momentum for war, some kind of military conflict, is definitely building. I saw today that the USS Gerald R. Ford strike group is now in Israel. Likewise, the buildup of some U.S. military forces in Israel proper, the state of Israel, is proceeding. And if I were going to bet money, I would bet that within the next few days or weeks, for certain, we're going to see some kind of military campaign against the Islamic Republic. Could be wrong, but that is where the momentum is building. That's where the stories, the news stories, are definitely building. Okay. Number one, please, especially this weekend, be praying for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, Iran, because even if there's a military conflict, it's the believers in all these countries who are going to suffer the most. Number two, be praying for peace, Russia, Ukraine. We don't have a lot to talk about that today. Excuse me. And number three, reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front, whether it's the Western Hemisphere, the continuing issues in Venezuela, Cuba, Mexico, Epstein, whatever it is. All the stories I'm about to go through, these will be listed for you to look at later today when this episode is archived at messianicapologetics.net. Okay, our first story, and this is from 2C TV yesterday, 1:17 p.m. So this is when we were live. 2-minute, 10-second clip. 2C, after 3 hours of negotiations, the core sticking points remain. So this would have been in Geneva. Permanent restrictions, no sunset clause, zero enrichment, transfer of enriched uranium abroad, sanctions lifted only upon verified compliance. And the Islamic Republic has rejected the proposal for now. So we got this building situation, and we've got to just wait and see what happens. Okay. Visegrad 24, and this is yesterday at 1:29 p.m. Technical level discussions between USA and the Islamic regime in Iran will take place in Vienna next week. Reuters. Now, we know situations can change very quickly. Are there going to be some kind of negotiations or exchange in Vienna next week? Many people doubt it. Okay, this is from yesterday, open source intel, 2:36 p.m. So just as we were closing yesterday, the Iranian foreign minister, today was one of the best, most serious, and longest rounds of negotiations. We made good progress and seriously engaged with elements of a deal regarding both nuclear and sanctions issues. Most people, I'm sorry to say it this way, they've seen the way that the Iranian regime works, the Islamic Republic works, and my first response is he is bullshitting the news reporter here. The Iranian regime's strategy has always been to buy time, buy time, buy time. That's what it's always been. Now, buy time for what? Because you got some secret up your sleeve regarding a potential conflict with Israel or the United States. But we have learned that Iran does not keep their word. They lie through their teeth. And that's what I picked up when I saw that. This is just BS. Okay. From the Epic Times yesterday. And there you see Vice President Vance. Vance says U.S. sees evidence Iran is trying to pursue a nuclear weapon. As a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Iran has said it has a right to pursue a civilian nuclear program, but denies seeking a weapon. Okay, how much of that is accurate? I don't think the U.S. administration, I don't think most of the world is convinced that Iran just wants nuclear, its nuclear aspirations are for peaceful purposes. Now, this is from Disclose TV, 2:28 p.m., so we had finished yesterday. U.S. demands Iran destroy its 3 main nuclear sites and permanently deliver its remaining enriched uranium to the U.S. during nuclear talks in Geneva, Wall Street Journal. And then later, Iran rejects all U.S. demands in the latest round of nuclear talks, Wall Street Journal. That's not a huge surprise. And one of the things which we need to do, and I've said this on many live streams, many podcasts, we're trying to trace a series of events. Because if in the next few days, next week, whenever it is, we see that there's a conflict, military conflict taking place with the Islamic Republic, there are many people we know and love who are going to just be shocked. They have not been watching things continue to build steadily. We have. And they're going to hear drama. They're going to hear all these things from people. Oh, the end times are at hand. Oh, the rapture's right around the corner. World War III, whatever it is. We are here to provide a word of solace, a word of comfort, and to help stabilize them. Because we follow things day to day, week to week. So we stay stable and we stay sane. Because a lot of people are not following these things. A lot of people have not been keeping up to date. Instead, they're looking for, blood red moons to speak something to them, or planetary alignment to speak something to them. If you were living in the ancient Near East, if you were living in the ancient Roman Empire, even in the Middle Ages, you'd see something up there in the sky and be like, oh, I need to pay attention. Because you didn't have the 24-hour-a-day media, you didn't have the communication we have today. I don't really look at that kind of stuff. I don't put a lot of stock into it, actually, because I'm paying attention all the time. So while I think President Trump, for example, gave an excellent State of the Union address, and he talked about how all the things the administration had done, I wasn't terribly surprised by the things he said because I've been following what the administration has done. Other people have not. So we have this news roundup to keep you up to speed. So when there is that dramatic event, rather than you trying to figure out how did this happen, you already know largely how it happened. And you can then go help other people who need you to hold their hand and give them a word of comfort, cry on your shoulder, pray with them, whatever it is. Okay, here is a statement regarding the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Yesterday, 3:10 p.m., Visegrad 24. This is Sikorski. He is the Polish foreign minister, saying this war won't end like World War II, but like World War I, when Putin runs out of resources. He's already spent his National Reserve Fund. His last resource is the gold reserve. He started with 2,200, I assume that's tons, and is down to 1,700. This is the thing to watch. This is how he funds the war. So indeed, of course, we know and we pray for an honorable peace. It's not right that, tens of thousands of Russians and Ukrainians are dying every month. But this is more like World War I, the trench warfare. Obviously, there are drones involved in everything. But as the Russian Federation runs out of money, they run out of resources, it becomes more apropos to, make a deal, conclude this thing, wrap it up. And we're going to then be analyzing for many years to come, how did this conflict start in the first place? And could it have been legitimately prevented? All right, from Fox News yesterday, February the 26th, speaking of money. This is from Fox Business, I'm sorry. Iran regime about to collapse, Prince Reza Pahlavi says, as economic crisis deepens. And the byline, Iranian opposition leader tells Fox Business that Tehran is on its last leg as economic sanctions compound internal unrest. So even though we know that socially, religiously even, the pressure, the continued dictatorship of the government against the people having enough, we know that a lot of this has also been caused by the economic situation. The Iranian rial is, the last time I checked, it was like 1.6 million to $1. It actually crashed to no value at one point. When the Iranian rial is worth less than used toilet paper for all intents and purposes, That's enough of a reason for a population to demand political change. So it's not just religious, not just social, it's also economic. And where has all the Iranian, money been going to? It's been going to their nuclear aspirations. It's going to fund terrorism the world over. It's not going to help the people themselves with their essentials, water, electricity, hospitals, schools. It's not gone into the infrastructure of the country. Because it's absolutely true. The Islamic Republic gets overthrown. Guess what? A lot of Western companies are going to go into a new Iran and help rebuild and make it, a modern society with modern infrastructure, modern technology, water. Israel wants to help with desalinization, all these kinds of things. Okay, open source Intel's opinion from yesterday. At 1:02 p.m., I would not count on Vienna. And indeed, I think many of us are not counting on it either. Some of the things I saw immediately before going live, especially from President Trump doesn't appear to be very satisfied with the negotiations with Iran, but he is definitely going through the motions, and it definitely gives him at least a moral position of, hey, we tried to cut a deal with them, should he decide to pursue a military action. And right now, I forgot to mention this when we got started, right now, many countries, whether they're in Israel, Iran, other parts of the region, they are telling their embassy staff, non-essential personnel to leave, go home. So once you see that the embassy staff is told to, non-essential personnel go home, that's a pretty good indication that they know that a conflict is coming. All right, from I-24 News yesterday, the Iranian people are waiting for help to arrive. Help that appears close, capable, and sufficiently powerful to be truly effective against this oppressive and brutal regime. That's Jonathan Conricus, and there's a 2-minute, 14-second clip here. Of course, in Israel itself right now, I would have to say, social tension's got to be very, very high. People expecting that within the next week, they're going to be possibly remembering Purim in some kind of a bomb shelter, some kind of a community shelter, not out at their synagogues, out at their, community centers. I mean, so right now, of course, we don't want to be presumptuous, but, a lot of the main pieces are in place. The Abraham Lincoln strike group, now the Gerald R. Ford strike group. The F-22s, we talked about that yesterday. A lot of things are in place. A lot of things are in position. We just wait and see. From Newsmax, and this is from yesterday, 3:01 p.m. U.S.-Iran nuclear talks wrap up with no word of deal as war risk grows. So you can read through the details here later, but we know that, generally speaking, and we did not have great hope for any kind of negotiation, the U.S. and Iran. The Iranians could surprise us, but that doesn't seem very likely. Likewise, another article, this is from the New York Post, yesterday, 7:25 p.m., Trump moves more military might to the Middle East as Iran fails to make deal ahead of key deadline. So, yeah, things are coming together and the tension mounts and the guesswork begins. So, are we going to see follow-up technical talks in Vienna, Austria, Monday, possibly? Of course, Austrian capital, home to the United Nations nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency. So that's why Vienna was presumably named as a place. I'm not very hopeful. We could be surprised. And look, I had a discussion last night. John, what is your prediction? I said, look, I am monitoring things. I'm not going to make any prediction, for certain, because I have seen, especially in the prophecy world, I've seen too many people claim this is going to happen, that's going to happen, and then they lose credibility. I believe that it's still possible, as infinitesimally likely it might be, that the Islamic Republic could come to its senses and they could say, okay, we need to go into exile. We've lost. The people don't want us. Israel is ready to go. The United States is ready to go. Let's just do what Bashar al-Assad did, go to exile in Russia. If they come to their senses. I don't think they will, though. Okay. All right. I need to go pull up a post, which I did not include in my. Okay, I'm sorry. Trying to find a post which I think I overlooked. Yes, let me get the address, and this is important because it's from Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister. Okay, yes, here we go. All right, so here's a story from Newsmax. There's 4-minute, 53-second clip, and this was posted yesterday, but this is very important. That's Naftali Bennett, a former prime minister. Some of you all remember, I guess you can call it a political interregnum between Netanyahu losing the election for a period of about a year or so, and then Naftali Bennett became prime minister, and then after him, Yair Lapid, and then there was another election that saw the return of Netanyahu. So Naftali Bennett, smart person. President Trump is a very savvy person. He's no sucker to the Iranians. So even though Naftali Bennett, of course, would have disagreements with the Netanyahu and the current Israeli government on matters of Israel's security, he's going to stand with what the Israeli government's going to do. He is pretty much just as strong on Israeli security as Netanyahu is. Yeah, Trump's not going to make some kind of foolhardy Jimmy Carter type of mistake with this one. He just isn't. He knows that should he seek a bad deal with Iran, all of a sudden, wouldn't you know it, a lot of conservative voices, live streamers like yours truly, might be more negatively inclined toward speaking about the Trump administration and the conservatives, Republicans in general. Trump is not dumb. He knows what is writing on this. Okay, so back to the American home front. This is actually a real serious thing. The depositions of Hillary Clinton and then, of course, later Bill Clinton. Breaking. This is from yesterday evening, 7:47, and there's 9-minute 43 seconds here. Breaking. Hillary Clinton went under oath and says she's never met Jeffrey Epstein. Jesse Waters' observation, well, Epstein went to the White House 16 times and Hillary had an office in the West Wing. Hillary says Bubba would never do anything inappropriate. Bill was just doing charitable work when he was in the hot tub. Okay, so we know that a lot of things, a lot of uncomfortable things right now are circulating regarding the Epstein files, regarding Bill and Hillary Clinton. It's bad. It's all bad. And I don't care who you are, liberal, conservative, whatever. It's bad because then it gets people to lose trust and confidence in their leaders. But the Epstein thing continues to unfold, and you all need to be at least passively aware of some of this. Yeah, we don't know what's going to unfold. We just know that Hillary Clinton gave her deposition, and as I was going live, Bill Clinton was still in the middle of his deposition. But to see a former president and a former secretary of state have to do this, that's pretty unprecedented in our modern times. Okay, from 2C TV, and this is from 1:20 p.m. yesterday. IRGC intelligence, there's a 4-minute, 25-second clip. IRGC intelligence leadership has now openly admitted to mass defections inside the regime. 13,000 were identified, 3,000 were summoned, dozens arrested. Tusi's conclusion, even by downplaying it, they confirmed the truth. The regime is bleeding from within. So how many people who are part of the current Islamic Republic, the Islamic Republic Guard, are seeing that it doesn't have a future and they're defecting here, they're defecting there? That's huge, because really without some of those defections, you're not going to be able to see the people of Iran be able to rise up and see the current government overthrown. All right, here's a story I saw on social media. This is very concerning and very upsetting. From yesterday, the Christian Post. A third of Christians trust spiritual advice from AI as much as pastor. Study. And you can read this article in its entirety. But, and I'm sure that there's also a difference of age groups, people trying to access technology for different answers. But in this case, spiritual advice. We're not talking about getting, information per se. Certainly, many of us use online venues to get information. Whether your preferred your preferred search engine is Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo, and all of those tools have some kind of an AI element to them now. Yesterday, I was on social media, and I won't mention what the actual subject matter is, but I saw somebody use one of these chat tools to get information regarding the Messianic movement. I am still pretty old school. I believe that it's much more beneficial to, rather than, tell me about this in the Messianic movement, go to conferences, visit congregations, talk to leaders, actually put your two fingers on the pulse of the movement. We go to a Messiah conference, the largest Messianic conference in the world, to get a feel for what people are actually thinking, people are actually talking about and saying. I don't place as much trust in these online devices as others do. But to know that people are going to them for not, I'm looking for verses about this, I'm looking for references about that. They're going to it for spiritual advice. That's very concerning, very concerning. And I know all of us are concerned about that kind of usage of AI. We've gone beyond just spell check. We've gone beyond just, tell me where, these terms appear in the Holy Scriptures or in related literature. Tell me what to believe theologically. In fact, just tell me what to believe. All right, from Fox News, the 27th of February, this morning, 6:44. In the hot seat, Democrats and Republicans will question former President Bill Clinton as he testifies before the House Oversight Committee in a high-stakes deposition tied to its probe into Jeffrey Epstein. So I know that was going on before we went live, and I'm sure that just as it involves the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, there's going to be a lot of talk about this in the coming days as people sort through what he testified to. Okay, here's something very important. This is from Newsmax. This is this morning, 9:30 a.m. Vice President J.D. Vance reportedly said there's no chance military strikes on Iran would result in the United States becoming involved in a prolonged war. I know that even people who are, they want to see the Islamic Republic removed, they want to see either the Crown Prince return or some kind of democratic regime, constitutional monarchy, democratic republic. They want to see it established. They don't want another Iraq war. They don't want to be stuck in the region with boots on the ground. I've told you this before. I had a relative who was very conservative during the time of the Iraq War. His best friend was in the army, he was sent to Iraq. He was killed. And then all of a sudden he became hyper liberal as a result of that. He lost faith in conservatism in America, looked to having faith in more, progressivism. Now, because of life events and really having gone into business, he's been steadily returning to conservatism. But no, none of us want another 2003 Iraq war. That's why, limited strikes, quick, decisive action. Okay, the American people, conservatives, we want to see that. We want to see him taken out very quickly, but we want to be able to hand over the reins of the whole operation to the Iranian people themselves, who want to see their country return to what it was before this despotic regime. Okay, along with that, from the Epoch Times, quoting the vice president, just because one president screwed up a military conflict doesn't mean we can never engage in military conflict again. We got to be careful about it, but I think the president is being careful. Okay. All right. We have 3 more stories and then we'll conclude. From Open Source Intel, this morning, 9:43, former Israeli Defense Minister Gallant, the coming weeks will shape the coming decades in the Middle East. Yeah, regardless of what you think about the end time scenario, whether you think there's going to be an elongated period of peace and security or not, we know things are going to change in the Middle East should there be a conflict with the Islamic Republic of Iran, and that we will be taking some decisive steps toward the second coming. We don't wish to be presumptuous. I present a lot of different possibilities out there to you regarding the end times. I hope that our family learned from the presumptuous statements of the turn of the millennium. That's why you will never, ever hear us again. Of course, we haven't done it for 20 years, so it doesn't matter. But you'll never see us subject God to some kind of a timetable, especially involved with some kind of fallacious 6,000-year reasoning. We are told instead in the scriptures to look for religious, political, and sociological signs. That's the Olivet Discourse. That's the outline Yeshua gave in Matthew 24. That's what we're trying to monitor here. Okay, as it involves how things change, guess what? Something has already changed from what was previously announced. Visegrad 24, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio to visit Israel. That was already expected. This is from 1036. Fox News report that his visit will take place on March 2nd and 3rd. The purpose of the trip will be to hold negotiations on issues related to Iran, Lebanon, and Gaza. So that visit was expected on the 28th. It's now been moved to March 2nd and 3rd. Things can change all the time. The news changes. That's why we do the news roundup later. When people go to look at this episode in the future, look at the back episode, they're going to do it to look at approaching one law controversies, not necessarily the news roundup. Okay, and then finally, and this is from Open Source Intel Defender, posted at 11:43 a.m. today. While on Air Force One, U.S. President Donald J. Trump said that there will be additional U.S.-Iran talks today, but emphasized his unhappiness with the nature of the Iranian negotiations framework, saying he doesn't like how they negotiate. When asked about the potential of strikes on Iran, he gave an ambiguous answer. Right, that is precisely what we would expect from the president at this point right now. But it is not outside the realm of possibility that this weekend, next week, we're going to see some dramatic action. We don't want to be presumptuous, but we know these factors are very live right now. We know that even though Witkoff and Kushner have gone through various rounds of negotiations with the Iranians, Muscat in Oman, and now twice in Geneva, talk of Vienna now. We also know that U.S. military forces have been building up in the region. The U.S. Navy is not in the region on some pleasure cruise, okay? You got 2 carrier strike groups, the Abraham Lincoln and the Gerald R. Ford. What's going to happen? I pray that the Iranians are smart and that they cut a deal and that these different mullahs and what have you, they all go into exile. But we know that the probability of that happening is very, very small. And instead, at a time and place of either Israel's choosing, the United States choosing, we're likely to see some kind of military activity in the coming days and weeks. And that's why we have to be in prayer for protection for the believers in Iran, the Messianic Jewish community in Israel. Of course, got to pray for everybody. And we got to pray for ourselves here at home that we stay protected, but we also can pay attention reasonably, rationally. We pray against fear, we pray against paranoia, and that we're able to reasonably sort through what all this signals. Because the analogy given by Yeshua, and we'll close with this, is one of birth pains, right? And labor pains go in various stages, which means we're not just going to see the end times show up all at once, right? It's not going to be like, you went out and you ate a huge meal and all of a sudden you get home and I got to go to the bathroom immediately. It's not going to be like that. It's just going to come, very steadily in stages, and they're going to get faster and faster and faster. And there are going to be many people who draw conclusions, especially with Purim or the Festival of Lots coming up, and connect it to modern Iran, modern Persia. We watch, we wait, and we know that as believers, we have access to the infinite power of heaven. And I pray that we can connect to that. So next week on our theology roundup, we've concluded the One Law series. It was not easy for me to do. I know many of you, you're not happy with me. Others of you are overjoyed with me. And that we've offered a third solution, a third way, supernatural compulsion, the work of the Holy Spirit, which you don't often hear enough in this discussion. Because, there are issues coming down the pike which are 100 times, 1,000 times more important than this one. But next week, we're going to start addressing the Bible passages, Micah 4, 1-3, Isaiah 2, 2-4. And, we'll cover some aspects of God's Torah, Messianic people today, along with that. And then I've got some other ideas as we continue addressing some of these real difficult issues, which really we should have resolved in the past 10 to 15 years. We really should. But, unfortunately, we have to live in the Messianic community, which was given to us by some people, not all, but by some people who were insecure, were fundamentalist. They didn't troubleshoot things the way they should. As we move forward, we need to forgive them and forgive some of their limitations, but we've got to see a better way as we resolve these things and as we recognize that we are living in some very uncertain, perilous times. And indeed, the battle is over the eternal destiny of human beings. As always, on behalf of Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for our ministry efforts. Please do consider signing up for a monthly $25 or $50 donation. If you have not, be sure to visit my website, messianicapologetics.net, where you can access a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions entries. You can take a look at some back issues of Outreach Israel News, back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee moment shorts, and generally, you can take a look at our ministry adventures over the years. Be sure to give this episode a thumbs up or a heart, as it will help its exposure on social media, and I do encourage you to repost this episode to your different social media feeds, Facebook, X, or Twitter, Instagram, email it to a friend. We will see you again on Monday with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you. Shabbat Shalom, and take care.